Bicol, Eastern Visayas, and parts of Mindanao. Thank you for joining again, everyone, and I apologize again for the for the glitch. We will now give it to Sabrina to lead the discussion on the COVID-19 impact report.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. And again, sorry for the technical issues we've been having. My name is Sabrina Qureshi, and I'm the Director of Bankers Without Borders, Grameen Foundation's volunteer initiative. It is my great pleasure to take part in today's discussion. As Michael mentioned, to understand the impact of COVID-19 on the coconut sector, last June, Grameen Foundation interviewed 11 organizations that looked into the pandemic's effect on the organizations, whether it's on their business operations, client engagement, crisis response, or assessment of future needs. I'm just quickly going to summarize some of the findings from that last research to set the stage for today's discussion. Would you please move? That's the right slide. Thank you. So while we interviewed 11 organizations, 6 were able to operate continuously during the lockdown. 5 had suspended operations for an average of 60 days, but all were operating at a reduced capacity. The community quarantine brought about reduction of revenue, cash flow, and an increase in operating costs. Some were lucky to see an increase in the demand for their products, as they either had ongoing contracts before the pandemic, or some were able to sell their products through Facebook Marketplace, or diversify their offerings by including virgin coconut oil or potting mix to meet an increase in consumer demand for health and for wellness goods. Revenue projections were grim, with more than half of the organizations anticipating cutback. Microfinance institutions reported a reduced number of new loans and repayments due to the mandatory grace period for loans. And all hosts noted following guidelines released by the governments as opposed to generating their own policies. When asked about their priorities for in the next 1 to 2 years, hosts put safety and security of their staff and customers first. Second priority was in securing business operations. Liquidity came in third, and growth, while important, did not seem as important during the time of our interview. In terms of farmer-to-farmer future volunteer support, the emphasis was on the direction setting for the organizations, value additions to their products, and improving on the skills and knowledge of their members. So this gives you a quick summary of the 2020 survey. Now on to the main crux for today's webinar. I'll invite Beverly Brule, the Farmer-to-Farmer Senior Specialist, Monitoring and Evaluation, to present you the findings and insights from the most recent survey. Thank you.
I believe Beverly may have lost her connection as well. She might still. Beverly, are you there? Hi Bev, are you still there? I can go on for. Yep, go ahead, Bev.
I think I was able to get back. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My apologies for the technical difficulties. I am Beverly Brule, Senior Specialist for Monitoring and Evaluation, and I will walk you through the results of our second study to better understand the continuing toll of the COVID-19 pandemic to farmer host organizations. To provide a situational context around the results of our study, we conducted survey interviews from February to March of 2021. At the time, Greater Manila area, which consists of Metropolitan Manila, and nearby provinces of Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal are under general community quarantine, or commonly shortened to GCQ. This means that businesses are operating at 2/3 capacity, and while public transportation are not yet in full operations, travel passes from one area to another are no longer required, and people can freely cross borders to other towns and provinces. Curfew hours are observed from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. Due to the surge of COVID cases, the quarantine status was reverted back to enhanced community quarantine, or ECQ, the strictest lockdown order from March 28 until recently, May 14. It is also crucial to point out that in the last quarter of 2020, the Philippine agricultural sector suffered massive losses due to the onslaught of 3 typhoons that came one after the other, one of which was Typhoon Goni, or locally known as Typhoon Rolly, which was the strongest recorded typhoon for the year. In the Bicol region alone, where a number of our host organizations, as well as the largest concentration of coconut farms are located, suffered the loss of 1.23 billion pesos, or around $26 million worth of crops. Total agricultural damage incurred by the country in the last quarter of 2020 amounted to 4.6 billion pesos, or estimated at $96 million. For the second leg of our study, we interviewed 13 organizations who serve as hosts or potential hosts to FarmertoFarmer Caucus volunteers. These organizations represent various sectors along the agricultural supply chain. They are agribusinesses, farmer cooperatives, microfinance institutions, and credit cooperatives with operations across the country. Next slide, please. We inquired about the various aspects in their operations and how the pandemic and the prolonged quarantine affected their businesses. We'll quickly go through each aspect one by one. You will be able to read the full report at the FarmertoFarmer official website, as well as download the full report at the Grameen Foundation website. We are also emailing you copies after this webinar. In the first aspect, business operations, more than half, or 7 out of 13 or host organizations, have remained open but are operating at a limited capacity, while the rest have gradually returned to their normal operations. 4 out of the 7 host organizations with limited operations have reported that they are operating at 51 to 75% capacity, while the rest are still operating at less than half of their normal operational capacity. More than half of the hosts have experienced reductions in various aspects of their business operations, such as sales, active customer base, cash flow, and workforce, all of which had grossly affected revenue. Half of the host organizations reported to have observed an increase in government regulations, which also affected in the new policies that they had to implement in their respective businesses. All host organizations cited that business constraints that they are currently dealing with revolves around the supply chain, guaranteeing the health and safety of their workers, access to financing, liquidity and maintaining working capital, and sales and collections slowdown. For financing operations of microfinance institutions and credit cooperatives, the 3 agricultural lending hosts were still reeling from the lingering effects of the lockdowns despite the move into GCQ. A reduction in loan disbursement, loan repayment, and application were seen as the lingering effects of the lockdowns, as clients tend to be more conservative in borrowing credit. For farm operations, we have 6 hosts who have farm operations, and despite the relaxation of the quarantine protocols, half have shared that they are still having difficulties in accessing their farm sites. Almost all hosts have reported to be facing challenges related to transportation of materials and harvests. Staff access to farm sites were also hampered for almost all of the hosts. They are having difficulties with limited staff mobility. Staff security is also a great concern for more than half of the staff. Next slide, please. For cooperative membership and benefits, membership benefits of cooperatives were gravely affected due to the pandemic. Almost all of the cooperatives reported to have experienced withdrawals from their capital build-up fund. Half of the hosts also shared that despite the move into GCQ, their organizations had difficulties in communicating with members and with membership intake. For coping mechanisms of cooperative members during the GCQ, both MFIs and cooperatives have reported that their members needed to reduce food consumption and household expenses, as well as delay payments on bills and loans as a way to cope with the pandemic. We also asked about the employee welfare of our host organizations. They reported that they continued to extend various forms of assistance to their staff in the midst of the GCQ. Aid was provided in the form of PPEs or personal protective equipment, accommodations near the workplace or farms, transportation, grocery or food allowance, vitamin supplements, and cash. There were also changes observed in employee responsibilities. An MFI host reported to have staff from other departments support branch activities to serve as backup, especially for monitoring and providing assistance to their members. Payment collections and trainings were also limited as mobility from one area to the next are still moderated. As an organization, Grameen Foundation pays particular attention to the challenges faced by women, especially during the pandemic. A host cooperative reported that some women in their staff have resigned to be able to take care of their children and supervise their online schooling because their husbands had to spend more time working due to the pandemic. A number of women employees also felt disempowered due to the restrictions posed by the pandemic, limited mobility to conduct their work and business transactions, on top of the doubling responsibilities in the home, leaves women with less opportunities to earn money for the family and to connect and socialize. These leaves women feeling inadequate and lacking social support in performing their duties. Lastly, for the business outlook, overall, hosts remained optimistic for the upcoming 6 to 12 months, with the majority anticipating an increase in sales, revenue, return of active customers, stabilization of cash flow, and sourcing of inputs. Microfinance institutions and credit cooperatives are also predicting an increased demand for loan and deposit products as well as loan repayments. Organizational priorities in the next 6 to 12 months would focus on securing the safety and security of staff, improving business operations and ensuring continuity, and maintaining business liquidity. Business growth, although important, was still not perceived as urgent at this point in time.
Thank you, Beverly, for that, for those insights. I will now invite our various panelists to join in our discussion. Our first panelist is no stranger to me, a veteran BWB volunteer and a second-time farmer-to-farmer volunteer, Nancy Wells, who will tell us more about her volunteer assignment, but how the pandemic made business planning even more important today for our host organizations. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you, Sabrina. I did have a wonderful time volunteering. I'm going to initially talk about the business planning aspects, and we'll circle back and you'll hear a little bit more at the end about my personal experience working with the group in the Philippines. As you all know, the Philippines is no stranger to major disruptions, including weather, of typhoons, earthquakes, political disruptions, power supplies, as we've seen today, as well as internet connectivity. But the pandemic itself has not really made business planning more important. It's actually just emphasized the importance of business planning. It's underscored how important thorough business planning can be. So planning strategically for any major disruption, including the ones I've described, as well as COVID, all kind of combine to emphasize the significance and importance about how planning is manifested. Next slide. A couple of the areas that we've identified for a COVID-19 type of major disruption, has shown us that the continuity plans themselves, business continuity plans themselves, have been left wanting. In this situation, we've seen a pivot from an annual budgeting scenario to a much shorter time frame as the uncertainty grows within the environments. So as opposed to being able to plan across the entire span of your cycle, you shorten it all up and only plan for the immediate future, whether that shifts to quarterly or monthly or even weekly for some organizations. You also prioritize payments. As we heard from Beverly, employee welfare was quite crucial, and salaries become really important. That's probably the higher priority for where the payments are going, or enabling key activities like distribution channels. It's also important to note that there's increased accountability for influxes of money that might be coming from places like emergency funding. The organization has to be able to allocate or reconcile how that funding was spent later on. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, we're also looking at prioritizing distributions to the areas that are suffering. So if you're looking possibly for direct payments to farmers or direct payments to some of your constituents, either way, the way it was distributed before, we may have to rethink the entire approach. We also have to pivot to accomplish potential fundraising where we're not getting emergency funding. So we might do emergency fundraising, and you'd reallocate some of the personnel to accomplish that endeavor. And also assuring that emergency contacts and accessibility are available to everyone, and when there's no movement, that everyone has the ability to communicate clearly in those situations. Next slide. I think that's it for me for now.
Thank you, Nancy, for that. And we'll definitely have you back right after this panel. Our second panelist, FarmertoFarmer Volunteer, Annette Acosta, has recently completed her volunteer assignment with household multipurpose cooperatives on risk mitigation. And you'll hear more about the cooperative soon, right after this video message. Unfortunately, Annette could not join us today live, but we have a quick video summarizing her work and experience.
Hi, my name is Annette, and thank you so much for having me. Sorry I couldn't be live, but I hope this video also shows a little bit of the risk management and the importance of it. So I want to talk to you about why it's so important to measure risk, especially in these times. I mean, risk is the possibility of an adverse event happening and the potential of the negative impact. So as we've seen with COVID, there's so many new things that are causing problems in the supply chain, guaranteeing the health and safety of the workers. We know there's so many problems. So with a framework, we can use this tool to prevent and to always be managing the probability and the severity of these problems. So I want to talk to you really quickly about a framework and how to use this feedback loop to be measuring and monitoring the possibility of risk, and how we need internal controls and reporting and active oversight of this, so we can really be prepared for all these issues. So first of all, we need to identify all the risks. And like we've seen with the studies here, we know that with COVID, we have working capital issues now, we have sales and collection slowdowns, we have liquidity problems. So we need to identify what are the most important risks in the cooperative, with the farmers, and make a list of all these issues. And then we need to assess the probability of them and prioritize them, like which are the really, really important ones that we need to pay our attention. And we can do this with a risk management matrix. And the second slide of the presentation, I show an example here that I use with the cooperative of HMPC. So we need to see the severity of them happening. So are they low, moderate, or high? We need to see what management are doing right now to avoid these problems. Are they have strong controls? Do they have acceptable controls or weak? And this will give us a picture of where we at and to where we want to be. So if we look at the profile, then we can combine them and see which are the most important. So are they high, moderate, or low? And obviously we want to look at the ones that are high, because this is where we need to put our focus, because we know it can affect our operations or whatever we are measuring. So once we have this identified and have this matrix done and prioritize them, we need to develop strategies. So we're going to focus on the ones that are high. So we need to develop strategies on those issues. So we need to develop policies, guidelines, procedures for day-to-day operations. What do we need to do to address this issue? And then with this, we are able to make conscious and informed decisions. So it's very important to have these procedures. And then we need to develop controls. How are we going to know if something is happening or not? Then we need to have key metrics. We need to be measuring. We need to design a system of controls and monitor tools that are going to tell us if we are exceeding the acceptable levels. If we see that we are going over something, then we need to come back and, it's red flags. So very important to know what metrics and how we're going to be measuring this to avoid something really bad happening. And then we need to integrate these policies and the procedures and controls into the operations. So we need to assign someone to oversee them. Who's going to be the responsible person? And this is very important because they have to make sure that the risk controls and everything that we put in place are being respected, and to measure and to be looking at the metrics. And they're going to be the ones who say, okay, this is going overboard, this is not what we want to be. So very important to have a responsible person. Then we need to be testing. We need regularly checks, and very important to have a good management reporting to understand what are the controls doing, are they being effective, are the policies working. So if we don't report them and we don't test them, we're not going to know. So very key to be checking regularly to try to minimize risk. So this is the part where we need to evaluate, are we really minimizing the risk that we want to attack? And if not, then we have to review them and see what we need to change, how the programs, how the results are being, how the results compare to what we want to be. So if we need to make adjustments, if we need to do something else. And here it's important to maybe have an internal audit for them to evaluate, to look at the picture of what's happening, to decide where to go with the processes. And really quickly, I will just show a small example of how we can use this risk assessment framework. And one of the key issues that we saw, it was the health and safety of workers. So by identifying and assessing the risk, we know the biggest risk is for employees to contract COVID. So we have to develop a strategy to avoid this. And this can be done through having policies of wearing a mask, of keeping distance, of washing their hands, all those things. then we need to design a control. How are we going to be measuring if this is going overboard? By implementing weekly testing on the workers. And we need to assign someone that's responsible to make sure that the policies are being kept, that people are wearing the mask, they are washing their hands, etc. And then we need to test and evaluate those results. So we need to maybe have an internal team that can see if they are really if employees are following the guidelines, but very important to test the results with other cooperatives, with the COVID cases in the country, in the city, in the region, to see if we are maintaining a low level, if we are really protecting our employees, and revise the policies. If we have high number of COVID cases, then something's not working, and we have to go back to those strategies and make new changes. So this is always a loop. We always have to be looking out for new things. Right now, COVID's a big thing, so we have to make this list to identify, assess, and prioritize all the risks that we want to do and go through the loop to be prepared, to be able to manage them and minimize this risk. So I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much for your time.
It is my pleasure to invite our third panelist, Neil Poros, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Household Multipurpose Cooperative, to provide us his firsthand experience during the pandemic and with our volunteers. Neil?
Pleasant day to all of us. I am LP Junel Poros III, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Household Multipurpose Cooperative, or HMPC. We are based in Antipas, North Cotabato, in the island of Mindanao. In March 2020, HMPC was in its worst financial situation. We were trying to find ways in repaying our cacao production loan, which reached to 115 million pesos, or $2.34 million from a bank, in order to help our 733 cacao farmer members who were affected by the drought of 2015 to 2016, and a business plan which lacked risk assessment. We were using our income from our banana plantation and other consumer goods and services while negotiating with the bank and scouting for projects to help us tide over our difficulties. Then the COVID-19 pandemic was declared. We had to suspend our operations. We conducted series of meetings to discuss possible solutions. There were even times that we ended up our conversations seeing each other with tears in our eyes. Yes, we really felt the pain and heavy loads, but it never crossed in our minds that we will surrender. After 2 months, we decided to fight back, to resume our operations with more determination. Being in the agriculture sector, the government gave us food passes to transport our agricultural and food products. Then help came from various agencies such as the Departments of Agriculture, Trade and Industry, and local government units in forms of facilities, trainings, and funds for our cacao business. Finally, the restructuring of our loan with the bank was approved as well. Then came Grameen Foundation's Farmer-to-Farmer program. We chose to become resilient after 2 major disasters in a span of 5 years. Miss Annette Acosta, our F2F volunteer, trained us on financial risk management. The training was a real eye-opener to us. We were able to understand what steps and processes we are going to undertake through the continuous feedback loop. We immediately formed a risk management committee. Our engagement with Miss Annette equipped us to formulate our risk management matrix with the participation of the key staffs and managers spearheaded by the risk management committee. During our workshops, everyone's ideas have contributed a lot to the formulations of strategies, policies, and activities. We even found out that there were policies that need to be improved or revised moving forward as a policy. Every project, business proposal, and plan we will venture into will be subjected to the assessment of the Risk Management Committee with the Board of Directors approval and policy formulation. We are now on a stage of recovery from all the challenges our office encountered. We continue to be aligned with our sustainable plan, which is to become one of the key players in the world market when it comes to the chocolate industry. With cooperations from our membership and you, we can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil, so much for your presentation. Our final panelist is a special farmer-to-farmer volunteer, our first Philippines-based local volunteer who was able to evaluate a coconut cooperative's business model and provide in-person staff training while being supported by Nancy Wells, whom you just heard from. Jessica, bienvenido. It is a pleasure to invite you to tell us more about your experience and project.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. Today, I will share you my experience conducting fieldworks during pandemic. So a little background, I was assigned together with Nancy to aid the cooperative sustainability of Alaminos Laguna Cooperative, Consumer Cooperative or ALACO by addressing their goals through business development planning. So as a local volunteer, I was able to personally interact with the members of ALACO. I can say that my experience conducting fieldwork was really challenging and at the same time interesting. So due to pandemic, the data gathering became difficult since strict lockdowns make mobility of people limited due to rules and regulations. So to connect with ALACO members, I tried doing three things. Please, next slide. First is phone interviews. Second is farm visits. And third is face-to-face interviews. My dilemma doing the phone interviews is that not all members are contactable. Some of their contact details are no longer available, while others did not take my call at all. As for farm visits and face-to-face interviews, my major challenge is the rescheduling of visits, since there are successive onslaught of typhoons and the changing quarantine protocol in the area. Overall, the main predicament during the assignment is the accessibility and availability of the members for interview. To be honest, it is really frustrating since everything I planned didn't went good, and it is time consuming. However, more than that, I learned to be more flexible and exert more patience since I really want to help ALACO to be more sustainable. During the course of the assignment, I gained a lot from that. So all my hardship that I experienced during assignment paid off. So the passion of the members to improve their organization made me realize that farming as a business is no longer unrealistic dream. So next slide, please. In addition to that, I finally understand why it is important for farmer organization to continuously improve their capabilities, especially in these times of pandemic. Why? First is it empowers the farmer as one unit. As cooperative, the organization can band together and pool their resources together. So by organizing themselves, they can consolidate their products and sell them as one, which can result to better market and better prices. Second, it provides opportunity to farmers to effectively play a role in the market economy and benefit from it. By strengthening the capabilities of farmer organization, the farmers can gain access to production inputs such as finances, technologies, and have a more timely and accurate market data. Third, it provides better opportunities to use limited resources more effectively and efficiently. By knowing the limitation of their members and the, by pooling their resources, the cooperative can support them by providing various and appropriate services. Fourth, it promotes sustainable farm enterprises. A strong and vibrant farmer organization can help identify economic opportunity for their members, empower them, allow them to convert individual risk into collective risk, and mediate them to access assets that they can use to utilize to earn a living. This is evident during the pandemic. And lastly, it improves not only the quality of life of the farmer members, but also the quality of life of their communities they belong. Uh, Farmer organization, if equipped properly, can help reduce the poverty in their area, ensure food security, encourage youth to engage in agriculture, and create more sustainable livelihood. So that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jazz. And thank you to all four panelists for your presentations and for sharing your various experiences and invaluable insights. As we pose questions to the panelists, I invite all our participants to send in their questions via the chat box, and we will open up the floor to questions. So feel free to send in your questions. My first question is to Neil. Neil, you must have something unique in HMPC that allowed HMPC to survive a drought, the pandemic, and stand strong, proud after 20 years. What advice do you have to other cooperatives who are having difficulty, especially during the pandemic?
I think the unique trait of HMPC is that in times of difficulty and challenges, we never surrender. The strong unity of our team binds us to fight together, work together, and pray together. Our strong sense of ownership that deeply rooted in our hearts and minds to our cooperative made us stand still and nobody quitted. It is also because of the strong spirit of volunteerism in our employees. It is their sacrifices and perseverance that made us recovered. And we also established strong linkages to different line agencies, institutions, and organizations who were generous enough to extend help during our needs. And in return, we give value and importance to their interventions, and we 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 extend also we maximize its purpose and extend help to our members. In a way, we can show it to them that there were a lot of people benefited from their interventions. My advice to my fellow cooperatives is that in times of the difficulty, please never give up. We should work hand in hand, and the burden should be carried by only few person organizations. It should be distributed to everyone according to individual's role and capability. At the same time, let us always be eager to learn, strive for continuous improvement. There is always a room for improvements in our operations. It is also important to have risk management plan. Thank you.
Neil, really appreciated. Just since I see on the video, I have a question for you. During your volunteer assignment, you had to interact directly with farmers, train staff at the cooperative you were serving. What advice do you have on how to communicate better with farmers that we're serving?
So as I say, it's really frustrating in this time since it's pandemic. I cannot really go there always to communicate with them. So the thing I did is to build a report with the main person there so he can connect me with them, and then regularly contact them, updates them about what's happening, and to have more patience in my side and to be more flexible since I really cannot control what's happening outside of my control. So my advice is that first, you need to really remember why are you doing the volunteer? Why did you volunteer? So that you won't give up since it's really hard to get the data from them. And then second, be more flexible, exert more patience, and build rapport not only with build rapport with all the members. So in times that I need to contact them, I can easily just text them or chat them. So they will feel that it's not a burdensome for them to answer my question since we have a better relationship compared to just calling or texting or like that. So that's all.
Jazz. Neil, a question that came from one of the participants, a quick question. Small farmers in the cooperatives are really scared of COVID-19. On a scale 1 to 10, how do you assess their fear if they are indeed scared? Maybe we've lost Neil.
Sir Neil, you might be muted.
Yes. Sorry, ma'am. I just lost my connection.
I'll repeat my question. One of the questions that came from the panelists, the small farmers in the areas that you serve seem scared. Are they scared of COVID-19? On a scale 1 to 10, how do you assess their fear if they are scared?
Yeah, scaling how they are scared with COVID-19 are in our area of operations is that during the total lockdown, we really are the I scale it from 1 to 10, it's almost 10. But with the guidelines of the IATF, the health protocols, since we already observed the minimum health protocol same time, we observe their guidelines. We are now in the middle, maybe 5.
Thank you, Neil. Nancy, our traditional farmer-to-farmer engagements are in-person volunteer engagements. Due to the pandemic, your engagement was purely virtual. You took advantage of local volunteers to provide you with the on-ground support. What advice would you have for future farmer-to-farmer volunteers who may not be used to a virtual type of engagement? Can you talk to us through your engagement and experience?
Well, I don't know if everyone would have the advantage that I did of having a passionate and very hardworking volunteer the way I did, but I would say your selection committee on local volunteers was right on the money. Jazz and I had a terrific relationship, and although you heard many of her frustrations, I didn't experience those personally, and I could help motivate her to get the answers we needed. So by partnering up, it seemed that the whole experience was better than any individual experience could have possibly been, because I had a partner in crime, and then we had the activity that we needed to address. So you didn't feel as alone. One of the advantages of the remote volunteering was that I didn't have the need to have, I had some non-dedicated time. I could listen to the issues. I could consider those issues in my mind. And I had some days where I could think about the strategic problems. So in many ways, it was, it gave me this flexibility that I didn't have in my experience when I was right on the ground. It meant I could think through the projects strategically. And I think in a way, it might be a great opportunity for someone who is new to volunteering altogether for several other reasons, which is that you could continue to work full time while putting a lot of time into your volunteering opportunity because you slotted in when you had time to do it. More volunteers, of course, would be available. Not sure what's going on with the audio. There were. If you're not speaking, could you mute yourselves? Not sure who is unmuted, but so the other thing is that more volunteers might be available. You probably already know this, Sabrina. More volunteers might be available for remote opportunities than ones that actually could take 2 weeks with weekends and that type of thing off and to go remote. And there's a much lower chance of the volunteer feeling disconnected from farmer to farmer, because I could reach out to farmer personnel at any time using very the normal means in which you reached out to me in the first place. And I could make those connections of what is actually going on during the course of my endeavor. There were some disadvantages, as you might imagine. There's a greater amount of non-dedicated time has a tendency to sap the drive out of the people who are on the ground thinking normally it would be just 2 weeks and we would just do it all at once, and then there could be some sort of scope creep. It's also difficult to develop a relationship remotely, but Jazz and I did not seem to have that problem, but it would be normally more difficult, especially with the lack of connectivity to the members of the cooperative, in our case, that never really could get online and take advantage of something like a webinar or a Zoom call. And the other thing is that the length of the engagement itself, the needs change between the beginning of the engagement and the end of the engagement in some cases. Maybe the other thing that may be a problem for some is that it's possible that the client themselves might feel less in control of the volunteer's time because they're not like on the ground. All in all, my experience was extremely positive. I felt like I had a lot of support from Farmer to Farmer, from Jazz herself, and I think we did some really good work with the resources that we had, both being able to do online research into what the best practices were at the same time that we were actually engaged directly.
I say this was very helpful. Maybe we'll turn this into a blog piece soon. I think we've addressed most of the questions we've had from the participants. Michael, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, panelists. It is indeed a challenging time across the globe, but the effort of all the volunteers put into helping communities, especially from another part of the world, is really inspiring, and we hope that together we can continue to make a positive impact during the pandemic, even remotely. So thank you all for that. So we'll be, I think we're getting close to time, and we'll be wrapping up today's webinar. If you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email. We'll be happy to address those directly with you. But again, I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge and experiences. I'm sure our audience was able to gain some valuable insight to our efforts through the Farmer to Farmer program, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please stay tuned for updates and information about our next webinar. And a recording of today's webinar will be available and will be sent to all participants. For more information about our program and available projects, please visit bankerswithoutborders.com/volunteer. You can also shoot us an email again at gf_f2f@grameenfoundation.org. And you can also visit us on Facebook by typing fb.com/GrameenBWB. Again, on behalf of Farmer to Farmer Cocos here in the Philippines, we thank you, and we hope you can stay safe and have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Wala tayo bigyan nila ng chocolate.